Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. Tonight, I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered whether or not there was a way for you to get assessment done and you could collect data, but you didn't actually have to mark a thing? So I think that for all of us teachers, that might sound like a pipe dream, but using technology is definitely a way that you can leverage what we've got and all of the tools that many of us have access to in order to help us to alleviate some of that marking stress, especially when we're talking about the formative assessment that we are constantly collecting day to day on our students that helps to inform our instruction. So tonight we're going to be continuing the theme for the month of May, where we're going to be talking about technology and how we can use the tech that is in our classrooms or that is out there on the web, and how we can use that to leverage what's happening and leverage that tech so that we can get more done in a more efficient way, and we can maybe feel a little bit more comfortable with the tech and the tools that are out there. So in talking to some of my colleagues, using Google Forms is what we're going to be talking about primarily tonight, but using Google Forms is something that not a lot of teachers, I think, are using, and I think that means that it's an untapped product out there that we can really be harnessing to help alleviate some of that stress. And on another note, I have been using some Google Forms with my students and experimenting with them on how they work in the classroom, and the feedback that they are giving to me is that they want me to keep and continue to use Google Forms because they're really liking the feedback and the constant check-ins that they're getting from the data and information. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about how all the different applications that you use Google Forms in your classroom that I have experimented with and how that's worked out for me. And I'm also going to walk you through the very basics. I'm going to show you how I create a Google form in my classroom and walk you through what that's going to look like so that you could sign off of this video and walk right into your own Google Apps for Education account and make a form ready for your student tomorrow, if you were so inclined, or in all honesty, maybe next week when you might have more time planning on a Sunday. So Google Forms is the way that I can capture a ton of data without ever really marking a thing. Now, that doesn't mean that it takes all of my marking out of the equation, but it certainly gives me a lot of feedback and data throughout the day on different things. So some of the ways that I've used Google Forms is to formative assessment pieces, whether or not that's an exit card or a lesson review, a video viewing guide if they've watched something for, say, science and social studies, if they have a quick check for understanding, whether or not it's a self-assessment or reflective piece of feedback that they are then sharing with me, and it all can be entered in through a Google form, which gives me the flexibility to change how I'm going to use it. You can also use it to give feedback to your students immediately, and it's all automated, so you set it up as you're setting the form itself, and it will generate feedback based on student answers. And it's immediate for students, and that's what my students are really liking, is they're loving the fact that they can watch something, they can watch a lesson, they can do an activity, they can go check quickly for their understanding, and if they get the questions right, that gives them instant feedback and tells them where they were correct. It also lets them know where they were incorrect and maybe an area that they need to be focusing more on based on that feedback. And that's immediate, and I don't have to touch it in terms of marking. It's just the prep to set it up, which doesn't take a ton of time once you get used to it. Also, it's really good because it allows me to capture the status of a class. One of the best features for the Google Forms is that in their responses, it allows you to see the data in spreadsheets, in graphs. So you're not looking just at a page and page and page of numbers. There is an analysis that goes into it that Google does automatically for you by giving you a nice handy little pie chart Sometimes that'll help you analyze the information that you're getting off of that Google form, which saves you a ton of time when you're using this as a piece of formative assessment because it's quick to inform your instruction the next day. So quick question for you watching tonight. How many of you have ever used Google Forms? If you have used Google Forms before, give me a thumbs up in the comments. Let me know what you're comfortable with and whether or not you've used them or not. And if you've never used them, I'm sure there's another emoji that you can use to express whether or not you have never used them before at all, which is totally okay because I am still experimenting myself. I also really like to use Google Forms as a way to capture routine data, such as a sign-out form or parent-teacher interview or even other data analysis because for me, in terms of I can input information in there because I really do like the charts and data that it gives you at the end, and it means I don't necessarily have to analyze that myself. So one of the things that I really like about using the Google Forms is the idea that you can add quite a different host of options when you're making a form. So for instance, I'm going to share my screen here with you so that you can see what a Google form will look like and how you get started. So this is just a view of my Google Forms. Now, in order to get started, you're just going to click the plus sign here so that you can open up a new form. And you're going to have to bear with me here. Sometimes the tech is a little slow when I'm sharing it. So this is the start for all forms. Now, you can change this background here, and you can give yourself a title and a description for students to use. Oh, Nicole, I just saw that you saw it in a workshop, you've forgotten about it until now. So I'm hoping that this video for you, Nicole, in particular, you can save it, and then when you forget it, because it's like almost the end of the year, save it, and then maybe you can use it again for next year if maybe it's just too much at this point, which is totally okay. So this is where we start. This is your general form. Now, there's lots of different options. When you click on this little flower gear button, this is kind of the heart of how you're going to use it. So if you're just collecting information, you can just keep it as a form. And you can allow them to edit after they've submitted, which is good if you're thinking about like a parent-teacher interview or you want them to be able to go back and change things if things don't work. My favorite right now is the ability to make a Google form a quiz, because the ability to use a quiz means that you can give answers and you can choose the correct answer, which gives your students feedback right away. So when you choose make a quiz, it allows you to release the grade right away for students, and then they can also have missed questions. It gives point values for each, and it also tells them what the correct answer. And if you don't want them to know the correct answer because you want them to go back and edit after they've done it, so they're doing it a second time, then you can just uncheck any of these boxes, and that will change how your form interacts. So once you have a form, you are going to give it a title. So for instance, right now in my classroom, we're learning about fractions. So we can do mixed and improper fractions. For example, you can also say you're doing fractions, converting fractions to decimals. That is, you can change the title and all of that. And then you're going to go on to your question. Now, some of the great things about why they keep changing Google Forms, and these are some of my favorite features that are being used right now, and something that I have really been experimenting with, found a tremendous amount of value. If you're looking at this section over here, this is the different things that you can add. You can add a different question. You can add an image to your form. So if you want to make it pretty or add something there at the top. This is the one that I'm finding really useful, and that's adding a video. So sometimes I really want students to watch a video prior to using their form, especially if you're using a flipped classroom like we talked about last week. So you just simply head on over to YouTube, click the share button of a video you found, copy that link, head on back over to Google Form, and paste the YouTube link right there in the YouTube box. And it'll find it, click on it, and click select. And there it is. Now, my students did complain, you do have to resize it. They complained that it plays that very small window. So do resize it so that it plays much bigger for them. Their little eyes apparently don't like it when the videos are super small. So they asked me to make them bigger, which is something I had to figure out. But then once you have the video, you don't want to put questions right after it because it does then bump your video down to the bottom, which I found it the hard way. So you make a new section, and now you can put in the answers to the question that might be answered that you might want to put in there. Now, if you want multiple answers, so you're going to add a question here. If you want multiple answers, then you're not actually going to pick multiple choice. You'll pick check boxes if there's more than one correct answer. If it's just a traditional multiple choice with one answer correct with multiple choice, it seems pretty straightforward, but I assume that if I picked 2 correct answers, that it would then allow my students to pick 2 correct answers, but it doesn't. I learned that one the hard way with some frustrated students. So if you have multiple correct answers, it's a checkbox, and if it's just one answer, it's multiple choice. Also, short answer is great if you don't want to give them options, but there is a correct answer. So if you asked the question, convert 1/2 to decimals. Now, if you didn't want to write the 1/2 of that, you could just insert a photo of the fraction there. So you see this little button here. It would allow you to then enter in a photo of 1/2. So you have that and it would say, convert this fraction to a decimal. And you would see the picture of the fraction written in proper formatting. It doesn't allow me to format it correctly here in Google Forms, but my students have adjusted really well to that because they're going to see that frequently, especially if they're typing their answers. This is going to be most likely how they're going to type it. So if my short answer, I will add my answer key here and mark all other answers as incorrect. I'll give the option of how I want them to be writing that decimal. So either 0.5 or 0.5, depending on how they're going to write it, but both of those answers would be correct. And then I have that there for them. So there would the answer be. So we click on, we want to change that so that they would get 1 point. It's handy when you make them worth point values. Forms does respond better if it's a quiz for that. And then you can go back to edit question. And then you're done. So they would just answer that question. And you can add as many questions as you want. You can add different sections. So if you want to add a new video for them to watch, add a new section, add the video, add a third or fourth section for the question. And that's a really easy way to quickly get that information. So if you look at this form here, this is the triangle form that I created with my students. So they have answered here. Now you'll notice that there are a few questions down at the bottom where there were 2 answers and it's a multiple choice. So this is exactly what I was telling you where I picked the wrong option and it's trial by error. Now this is a really neat feature that I wanted to show you tonight, and that is the ability for students to upload a photo they've taken of their work right into the form, which I think is just amazing, especially in math. So if I've given them the instructions here to draw triangle ABC and I've given them the values to draw that triangle, well, they're not going to be drawing that triangle on their device, but they will be drawing that triangle with a protractor on a piece of paper. Now, because I have iPads in our classroom, I can get them to quickly add a file to that form, and I can choose what kind of file that they add. So if I go to preview the form to see what a student would see on their view, oh, it's not giving me permission to do that. So you would tell them what kind of image they're opening, and it's pretty straightforward. If they take the picture, there's a few check boxes that they have to go through. But once one of them figures it out, they all get it, which is great. And this is really handy for me. Now, if you look at the responses, I did say that if you look at the question, the responses by question, it'll tell you based on questions how many they got correct, and that there's some ungraded responses. So if I look at this student here, there's some ungraded responses for them. And there it tells me right away what things that they did not get correct. So that gives me feedback right away as to what it is that I can work on with them. If I want to see the spreadsheet of all of their data, I can click there, or I can also print their responses as well. So I find that really handy to be able to track how my students are doing in terms of the summary. So I've got my little chart here that tells me information. Not this one tells me a whole bunch of information because there's some ungraded parts. Now, this is another way I've used Google Forms. As I said, you can use Google Forms for routines. One of the ways I used it as a bathroom sign-out form. Now, I don't have this implemented in my classroom this year because we're still looking at baby steps since February. But if you have a regular classroom sign-out form where they have to write, I used this one year as a sign-out form with my students, and it prompted them. So I put a QR code right outside my door, and they took their iPads, they scanned the QR code, and it popped them up and had them select who they were by their name, and then why they were leaving the washroom, and what time, how many times they'd signed out. So they tracked that, and it prompted them that if they had signed out a third or fourth time, that they needed to see me with their agenda. So that was always interesting. So my favorite part was in the responses, I quickly got to see who was spending, just based on this pie chart, who's spending the most time in the washroom based on my data, which I thought was really interesting. How many times I've got some second repeat offenders, and I've got some people who are going 3 times and 4 times. So really that was that most of the students were going the first time, and a couple of students were going 2 times. And it's really these kids that I needed to kind of pay a closer attention to as to how many times they were going out and why. So there was a lot of gave me a lot of information in terms of who was using the washroom the most. I've also used it for parent-teacher interviews as well as conference feedback. And another way I've used it is for self-assessment. So this is a student writing survey that they fill out after they've written something, and then they go through and write a response, and it prompts them to go to different sections based on their response. So what type of writing did you complete? Continue to the next section. And if they completed a narrative or a personal narrative, it would prompt them to go to this next section. If they completed nonfiction, it would prompt them to go to different sections based on their answer for section 1. You can then tell it, if you answer this in section 1, you can go to this part in section 2, which is also really handy. So there's this actually available, this writing survey, because it is a bit more complex because it's got a whole bunch of different places to jump to. You can actually get this one in my TPT store, and once you have it, it is completely editable by you as well. And some of these math quizzes are also going to be in the bonus file in my Math Growing Bundle products. So you'll find those every once in a while. I like to slip in some freebies into that the bonus folder that's in that big bundle. When you buy the full year bundle for the math, a lot of this stuff gets plopped in there while I'm working on it so that you can test it out and kind of get quick access before I put it in my store. So I'm really finding Google Forms really handy for my classroom. It is a great way to capture quick data for my students. My students are absolutely loving it, and they are responding really positively to to using Google Forms in our classroom. Now, in terms of getting it to students, I saw that Dawn posted a comment that she's still getting used to using them more frequently, but technology is limited. And you can do this with if you have a set of even 1 or 2 iPads, even ask if there's families that have older iPod touches. So with my bathroom sign out, we either used iPads, but I also have an old iPod Touch that had a camera, and it allowed you to go into the Google Forms and complete that. So if you have an old phone that no longer has a SIM card, but still has a camera and access to the Wi-Fi that might be in your room, you don't need a huge device in order to be able to use some of the more procedural forms. Again, I was just using an iPod Touch for that form. I do only have 7 iPads in my classroom. So in order to move students through some of these math forms, we do use guided math centers where students have access to using that tech and using those forms at one of the centers that they rotate through the week. So that's somehow I manage those forms, as well as just taking turns and sharing is another one. If you don't already have tech that is assigned to your classroom or shared equally for you to use it, I do think that that is something, if you have the ability to advocate as to the fact that you need tech in your room at the point of instruction, not always in a scheduled period once or twice a week, say in a computer lab, it does become more handy to be able to use these kind of tech tools in a much more flexible way. It's often something that you need to propose, and it is a change for many teachers in how a lot of things have been structured in the past. And moving things forward using tech in your classroom, you really do want the tech in your hands at the point of instruction so that you can use these forms in a much more flexible way. And allowing students to bring in their own devices for instructional time only is also really handy to up the amount of tech that you have in your room, which makes the burden of trying to share a limited number of tech between a lot of students much more helpful. So that is all I have for tonight. I really hope for you that looking at how to use Google Forms and seeing some of the possibilities of how you could use Google Forms in your classroom has given you some ideas of what you could do. I would love to see how you're using Google Forms in your classroom. So please feel free to put a comment down below of all of the different ways that you are using Google Forms in your classroom. If you're catching this on the replay through YouTube or through the podcast, please hop on over to Facebook and leave a message on the video letting me know how you're using forms. As I said, I have just started really digging into how I can use Google Forms more frequently with my students, and I'd love to hear your ideas of other ways that these can be used throughout more applications than the ones I've mentioned tonight. So thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate the fact that you took your time tonight to watch this video and come back every week to catch other episodes. So again, if you want to read more about how I use Google Forms in my classroom, please head on over to www.madlylearning.com, where you get access to the blog post that will correspond with this episode. And if you want more information about the Teaching with Inquiry live show that we do every Monday night at 9 p.m., head on over to the show page at www.teachingwithinquiry.com, and you can catch this and all of the previous 50 episodes that we have done over the last year. You can catch them on, and links to all of their content on there. Thanks very much for tuning in tonight, and we will see you next week on our last technology topic for the month of May. Actually, next week is the long weekend, so it's not going to be next weekend because it's going to be holiday Monday here, but the following Monday will be our last week where we're talking about tech in the classroom for the month of May. So we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a wonderful week. Bye for now.